People who are genuinely good at reading others don't scan a room the way most people think. They don't study faces. They study the space between what someone says and how the room responds to it. They track micro delays, the half-second pause before agreement, the slight redirect when a topic touches something live. They notice who looks at whom when a decision is about to be made. This is not a skill they developed deliberately. It is a survival architecture, and it is, by almost every measure, extraordinary. Which is exactly why what happens next is so disorienting. Because the person who clocks everyone else's tells, who knows before the meeting ends that the outcome was decided before anyone sat down, who reads a text message and correctly identifies the emotion the sender was hiding, that person still gets blindsided, not occasionally, systematically, by the specific thing they were most watching for. There is a structure to this. It is not bad luck. It is not a flaw in the reading. It is something more precise and considerably more uncomfortable than either. Marcus works in strategic communications in Philadelphia. 41 years old, he is the person organizations hire when something sensitive needs to be managed, and no one wants to say the quiet part out loud. He is fluent in what is not being said. He reads the political weather of a room the way a pilot reads pressure systems, not by looking out the window, but by understanding what the instruments are actually measuring versus what they appear to measure. In professional settings, Marcus is formidable. He does not miss much. It is not a flaw in the reading. It is something more precise and considerably more uncomfortable than either. Marcus works in strategic communications in Philadelphia. 41 years old, he is the person organizations hire when something sensitive needs to be managed, and no one wants to say the quiet part out loud. He is fluent in what is not being said. He reads the political weather of a room the way a pilot reads pressure systems, not by looking out the window, but by understanding what the instruments are actually measuring versus what they appear to measure. In professional settings, Marcus is formidable. He does not miss much. He once told a colleague accurately and 2 weeks early that their team director was being edged out by a board that had already chosen his replacement. He was right. He is almost always right. The behavioral contradiction that lives inside all of this precision is specific. Marcus cannot accurately read a room where he is emotionally invested in the outcome, not because his observational skill disappears, because it redirects. The same instrument that detects everything in neutral territory becomes a confirmation engine the moment something matters to him. He sees everything and routes it through the question he is most afraid to have answered honestly. He does not know he is doing this. That is the mechanism, not blindness. Selective illumination. You have felt this, not as an abstract concept, as a specific moment in a specific room. The conversation where you noticed 12 things about the other person's behavior and used all 12 of them to build a case for the conclusion you needed to be true. You were not wrong about what you observed. You were wrong about what you chose to do with it. Or the meeting where you read the room correctly, sensed the resistance, tracked the body language, identified who held the real power, and still walked out believing it went well, because the alternative interpretation was one you could not afford to sit with yet. Or the person who showed you something about themselves early, something small, the kind of thing that in anyone else's situation you would have noted immediately, filed, and acted on. But in this situation, in this relationship, with this person, you translated it into something softer, something that didn't require you to respond. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is an application of intelligence in the wrong direction. In the 1970s, a woman named Zisa Zagabor, no, not her, a psychologist named Pauline Clance was studying high-achieving professionals at Georgia State University. She was not looking for what made them successful. She was looking at what they believed about their own success and how that belief structured their behavior when something important was at stake. What she found was not what she expected. The people most capable of accurate external assessment were the least capable of accurate internal assessment, particularly in domains where identity was invested. The more perceptive the observer, the more sophisticated their mechanism for managing information that threatened self-concept. They were not less aware. They were more skilled at working around awareness. She called the surface phenomenon something now familiar. But the deeper mechanism, the way high perceptual intelligence becomes a better engineered blind spot, is the part most people do not discuss. Different observation. Same structure operating. Observational accuracy and emotional investment do not coexist at scale in the same cognitive system. What this looks like from the outside. A highly perceptive person in a neutral situation operates like a precision instrument. In a situation where something important is at stake for them, a relationship, a reputation, a role they have quietly organized their identity around, that same person becomes a highly sophisticated rationalization engine. The behavior looks almost identical. The outputs are opposite in reliability. Watch it in Marcus. He arrives at a conversation with a long-term business partner, someone he has worked alongside for 6 years, someone whose behavioral tells he knows better than almost anyone in his professional life. The partner has been pulling back for 2 months. Slower responses, shorter commitments, the kind of incremental withdrawal Marcus would have identified in a client relationship inside a week. But this is not a client relationship. This is a partnership Marcus has built his professional identity around. So the same observational apparatus that reads client withdrawal correctly reads his partner's withdrawal as temporary distraction, as stress, as a phase. 12 data points arrive. 12 data points get reprocessed through the question, can this still be okay? 3 centuries earlier and half a world away. A man named Fernando Mendes Pinto, Portuguese explorer, one of the most acute social observers of the 16th century, whose accounts of Asia were so precise, they were dismissed as fiction for 200 years until historians confirmed them, wrote in his memoirs about the one navigational error that nearly cost his crew everything. He had read the coastline correctly. He had read the weather correctly. He had read everything except the assumption embedded in his own interpretation. The belief that the channel they were approaching matched the one he had successfully navigated once before. He saw what was there. He organized it through a prior experience he needed to be applicable. The channel was different. The intelligence was not the problem. The frame around the intelligence was different century, different stakes, same internal structure. The inversion the law reveals. The most useful social intelligence move a highly perceptive person can make is not sharper observation. It is a deliberate practice of identifying before a high-stakes conversation which conclusion they are hoping to reach and treating every piece of evidence that supports that conclusion as the observation most requiring scrutiny, not cynicism, methodology. What a forensic analyst calls controlling for confirmation. What the highly perceptive person almost never does, because they trust the instrument too much to suspect the calibration. What it looks like when someone has integrated this, they pause before processing, not after. Before a consequential conversation, you will notice them do something that looks like stillness, a moment that appears to be composure, but is actually an active identification of their own desired outcome, performed so that the observation that follows has a chance of being clean. The sophistication of an avoidance mechanism scales with the intelligence of the person deploying it. Here is the moment where this costs most. You are mid-conversation. Something has just been said that doesn't fit. A slight inconsistency. A statement that contradicts a previous one by enough to matter. In most people, this produces confusion or confrontation. In you, it produces immediate analysis. You have processed the inconsistency, identified 3 possible explanations, and routed to the most benign one that remains logically defensible. In under 2 seconds, without conscious decision, without once stopping to ask whether the most benign explanation is the most accurate one. That speed is not a gift in this moment. That speed is the mechanism. Marcus, walking out of the conversation with his partner, has already produced 4 clean, internally consistent explanations for behavior that, in a different relational context, he would have read correctly in 15 minutes. His intelligence didn't fail him. It served him. It served the specific function of keeping a threatening interpretation at a manageable distance long enough for the moment to pass. The behavioral signature of someone who has integrated this law. They name their explanations aloud. Not always, not to everyone, But when something feels slightly off, and they notice their own reasoning moving very smoothly, very quickly toward resolution, they apply friction deliberately. They say to themselves or carefully to one trusted person, "Here is the story I am building about this. Here is the story I am motivated to build." The separation of those two things is the tool. The highly perceptive person who cannot make that separation is not less intelligent. They are more efficiently self-protected. The visible cost of this pattern is a specific kind of repeated surprise. The blindsiding that comes at the moment of maximum inconvenience. Not at the first sign, not at the second, but at the point where the evidence has accumulated past the capacity of even sophisticated rationalization to contain it. That is when it arrives, all at once, with the horrible clarity of something that was, in retrospect, obvious for months. But the invisible cost is different and harder. The invisible cost is what it does to your relationship with your own perception. Every time you read a room accurately and use that accuracy to build a case for a conclusion your emotions needed, and then got blindsided, you recorded that as a failure of observation. You concluded you needed to observe more carefully. You sharpened an instrument that was not the problem. And so the next cycle runs with higher resolution inputs and the same compromised processing architecture. The identity level cost is this. You begin to quietly distrust your own read on things, specifically in the situations where your read is most needed. Not across the board, in the rooms that matter most, the situations where something is at stake for you. Which are the situations you most entered into with the hope that your perceptiveness would protect you? Marcus eventually sat in a conversation where the words being said and the behavioral reality of the room diverged so completely that even the framing he had built couldn't hold. Not a dramatic confrontation, a quiet meeting, a set of decisions already made, a professional relationship in its final administrative stages. He had known, at the level of observation, for 11 weeks. He had managed that knowledge at the level of identity for 11 weeks. The moment where both arrived at the same time was not the blindsiding. The blindsiding was the 11 weeks. He did not transform in that meeting. He sat with it. That is not the same thing as change, but it is where change begins. At the moment a person can no longer root a truth through a softer frame without feeling the routing happen. Clance's deeper finding, the one that outlasted the more famous surface label, was this. The mechanism is not a bug in high-performing, high-perceptive people. It is a feature. It exists because it has worked. Because managing information is sometimes the thing that makes difficult situations survivable. The problem is not that the mechanism exists. The problem is that it does not self-terminate when survival is no longer the correct frame, when the situation calls for accuracy rather than management. That is the behavioral truth. High social intelligence, deployed in the service of emotional survival, becomes the most sophisticated obstacle to the truth it is most capable of seeing. The contextual widening. Every perceptual gift operates inside a motivational architecture, and the architecture determines what the gift is actually for. Before the next conversation where something important is at stake, not a life question, a moment question, ask yourself this: at what point in this exchange did I stop observing and start building a case? You will not be able to answer it in advance. You will have to catch it mid-sentence. That is the only place it is visible. There is a specific quality to the awareness of someone who reads people well. It does not feel like knowledge. It feels like vision. When insight lands for a highly perceptive person, it carries the sensory quality of seeing clearly after a long period of blur. And that sensation is convincing in a way that ordinary intellectual understanding is not. It feels like arrival, like a location reached. But awareness is not a location. It is a direction. And the most elegant trap available to a high perceptive mind is the one that looks exactly like clarity. The architecture of a blind spot scales with the sophistication of the self-concept it is protecting. Marcus did not have a simple blind spot. Simple blind spots belong to people who are not paying attention. What Marcus had was structurally more complex. A high-resolution observational system whose outputs were processed through an identity that had organized itself around the idea of being the person who sees clearly. This is the layer beneath the pattern. Not just emotional investment distorting observation. The self-concept of being perceptive. The identity of being the one who reads rooms, who knows, who is rarely surprised, becomes the thing most aggressively protected by the very mechanism that makes the identity feel earned. Here is what that looks like in a room. Someone flags something Marcus missed. Not dramatically. A colleague, gently, in a side conversation, offers an interpretation of a situation that is more accurate than the one Marcus had constructed. Watch what happens. Not defensiveness. Marcus is too self-aware for obvious defensiveness. What happens is faster and quieter. He integrates the information, finds the version of it that is compatible with his existing read, and produces a synthesis that feels collaborative but is structurally an absorption. The new information enters. The self-concept remains intact. The blind spot is preserved by appearing to engage with its exposure. You have done this. Someone told you something about a person you were involved with, professionally, personally, and you listened, genuinely, and then found the reading that was true in both directions. That made both things compatible. That let you keep your original interpretation while appearing to have updated it. The update was cosmetic. You knew that somewhere. You filed it differently. In the late 1950s, a CIA operative named James Angleton, counterintelligence chief, considered among the most analytically gifted individuals in the agency's history, a man who had spent decades developing an almost supernatural ability to detect deception, became convinced that the Soviet Union had penetrated CIA operations at the highest levels. He was not wrong to suspect it. The penetration was real. What happened next is the part that carries the law. Angleton's investigative apparatus, built from genuine expertise, genuine pattern recognition, genuine historical accuracy, began to route every piece of incoming intelligence through the lens of that suspicion. Legitimate Soviet defectors were assessed as plants. Genuine intelligence was evaluated as disinformation designed to appear genuine. The very sophistication of his analytical framework made it capable of incorporating any evidence, including exculpatory evidence, as confirmation. He did not become less rigorous. He became more rigorously closed. The Senate Church Committee, investigating Angleton's tenure in 1975, documented the outcome. Years of paralysis, legitimate assets burned, genuine intelligence discarded, not because Angleton lacked intelligence, because the identity, the self-concept of being the one who sees through deception, had become the most protected variable in the system. Every observation ran through it. Everything that entered came out reshaped to its specifications. Different stakes, different century, same internal architecture, as Marcus absorbing a colleague's correction without actually updating. The inversion, the behavioral signature of someone who has genuinely integrated this law, is not that they are more confident in their reads. It is that they have developed a specific tolerance for the discomfort of a conclusion that reflects badly on their prior analysis. They can say, not performatively, not with rehearsed humility, I had this wrong in a way that tells me something about how I was looking at it. That sentence, delivered without immediate redirection to a new and equally confident position, is the observable marker. Most people who study human behavior never get there, because getting there requires letting the self-concept take the hit, and the self-concept has been too useful to lose easily. The behavioral signature in social situations looks like this. They ask the question that would most effectively destroy their own current interpretation before anyone else can ask it. Not as theater, as method. They locate the weakest load-bearing assumption in their own read and they stress. Test it deliberately before the situation forces the test. It looks like intellectual rigor. It is also emotional courage. The two are not separable at this level. Understanding a pattern from the inside of it is not the same as observing it from outside. This is the law the pattern is most afraid of, because this is the one where awareness becomes the hiding place. Highly perceptive people, the ones who have spent years studying behavior, reading people, identifying mechanisms, develop a sophisticated internal vocabulary for what they observe. They can name patterns. They can map dynamics. They can identify, often in real time, the psychological mechanism running beneath a surface interaction. This is a genuine capability. It also creates a specific and under-examined failure mode. The failure mode is this. Naming a pattern in yourself does not exempt you from the pattern. It relocates the pattern. It gives the pattern a more sophisticated home. The trap was set at the beginning of part 1. You were watching Marcus. You were identifying alongside the narration, where he was routing his observations through a motivated framework. You were tracking his blind spot. You were doing the thing the video described, observing a behavioral pattern with clarity from the outside. And that act of observing, the fluency with which you tracked it, recognized it, located the mechanism, produced the sensation that you were outside it. You were not outside it. You were demonstrating it. Because the question part 1 ended with, at what point in this exchange did I stop observing and start building a case, requires an answer that most people who recognize this pattern will never locate. Not because they lack the vocabulary, because they have already built a case for why they specifically are the exception to the mechanism. The case is built from their own perceptiveness. It is the most convincing case available to them, because they are the ones making it. This is the trap available only to people who understand traps. Marcus, after the meeting, did not transform. Here is what actually happened. He went home. He spent 3 days constructing an extremely precise and internally consistent analysis of how the dynamic had developed, what the other party had done, which early signals he had been right to notice, which he had misread and why, and what this revealed about the structural vulnerabilities of long-term professional partnerships. The analysis was excellent. It was also the next layer of the same mechanism. The pattern migrating from this can still be okay to I now understand exactly what this was. As a way of restoring the self-concept of the person who sees clearly, he was not avoiding the insight. He was completing it too quickly. Sealing it. Moving from disruption back to mastery without spending enough time in the space between. The space where the actual recalibration happens. The one that is not comfortable enough to look like clarity. The dark implication of this law is brief, but needs to sit without softening. If understanding a pattern is how you avoid experiencing it, then the more you understand, the more efficiently you avoid. Sophistication, in this specific application, is a faster route to the same destination as ignorance. The mechanism simply becomes harder for anyone, including you, to see operating. Here is the quiet elevation, because the dark implication is not the end of the structure. There is a version of the highly perceptive person who has integrated both laws, who has sat long enough in the discomfort of not yet knowing, in the gap between disruption and resolution, to let the recalibration happen rather than manufacturing it. That version does not look dramatically different from the outside. They are not louder about their uncertainty. They are not performing vulnerability. They move through high-stakes social situations with the same composure. But the composure is no longer a surface held against something. It is a genuine steadiness that comes from not requiring the read to be correct, from holding observation as ongoing rather than conclusive. They are still occasionally wrong, but they are wrong differently. The wrongness shows up sooner, costs less, and is processed without requiring the identity to be rebuilt around it. That is not a small difference. It is the entire distance between being a person who reads everyone and still gets blindsided, and being a person who can tolerate, for the first time, the possibility that they might not be seeing clearly right now. People who observe human behavior with accuracy will, under sufficient emotional pressure, use that accuracy to construct the most sophisticated possible version of what they need to believe. This is not a character flaw. It is an operating law. It runs in everyone who is intelligent enough to build a convincing internal world. The pattern examined here, the way high perceptual intelligence becomes a precision instrument for managed avoidance, is the visible surface of a deeper structure. The mechanism beneath it governs not just what highly perceptive people miss, but what they allow themselves to want, and how that want shapes every read they take credit for. That mechanism runs quieter than this one, and it accounts for more. The pattern underneath this one explains more about your behavior than this one does. That examination begins next. The question you carry with you. The next time you explain someone's behavior to yourself, quickly, cleanly, with the satisfaction of a read that fits. Ask yourself not whether the explanation is accurate, But whether it was the first explanation you reached for or the one that arrived after you let the uncomfortable version exist for long enough to be examined, you will know the difference. The uncomfortable part is that you will know it mid-explanation, not before it and not after.